So what we have so far covered shows uh, the basis on for practicing the Dharma, which means that of course, when if you were an animal, then you couldn't have the chance to practice the Dharma. But as humans, we can. So with the help of our intelligence, we can develop faith and love, compassion, and therefore it is very important, this faculty of intelligence that we have to make judgments of what is right and wrong, and uh, carry on with the practice of the Dharma. But then even if you may be a human person where there is no, if there is no Dharma there, the teaching of the Buddha, you cannot practice the teaching of the Buddha himself. Therefore, it is taught that you should have a human life, which is qualified by the 8 leisure and the 10 endowments or freedoms, resources. So while we have this body, even if someone may be a human being, but unlike animals, like elephants, which have who have really huge bodies, we have, as humans, we have an intelligence that can distinguish between what is right and wrong, and also to create the good conditions or to gain the good conditions for practicing the Dharma, and to avoid any hindrances and unfavorable conditions. So if you don't have this faculty of intelligence, then you cannot engage in these things. And so this human life is considered to be a very full of potential for practicing the Dharma, even in making a living in this life, and also particularly here in terms of doing practices for attaining higher rebirth in the next life, and also for that of the nirvana. This human life is considered to be the best life form, or the form of life, and therefore even with regard to attaining that of Buddhahood, this human life is considered to be the highest form of life for that. And so Jetongkapa has said that while having found this kind of precious human life that we have, which has so many good qualities, which come by as a result of very powerful causes that we have to have created in the past lives. And it is very difficult to find such a human life with all these great potentials. And having found this human life now, Jetongkapa goes on to say that we have to make it meaningful, or extract the essence out of it. The essence or making it meaningful, the best way to make it meaningful is by attaining that of Buddhahood. So this human life is the best form of life for attaining that of Buddhahood, which is attained through the practice of Bodhichitta, this infinite compassion, and also the wisdom realizing selflessness. And as for Bodhichitta, it comes about through the 2 aspirations. One is aspiration for liberating, or aspiration to benefit all sentient beings who are infinite like the space. And then there is the aspiration to become enlightened for the benefit of others. So Bodhichitta is this mind or the intention to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. Therefore, it is qualified by these two aspirations: aspiration for others to liberate others, and aspiration for Buddhahood itself. Now, in order to understand that, in order to gain or attain Buddhahood, you have to have this understanding of selflessness. Now, in order to be able to help other sentient beings fully, what you need is, first of all, on the one hand, you have to be knowledgeable about what you are going to teach others. Because if you don't know about how to practice and all this, and if you have not been through this, then you cannot teach others. Here we are not talking about subjects like learning history, but it is about transforming oneself. And so therefore you have to, first of all, be knowledgeable about how to help others and what practices are needed, and then you have to have the experience of it. So in order to know everything as they are fully, you without attaining omniscience, you cannot see everything, and you cannot teach others. And secondly, sentient beings have various mental dispositions, and therefore without knowing their dispositions well, you cannot teach what is needed for them. And as it is said that if you teach emptiness to those who are not yet receptive to it, then it can cause them to lose faith. And also, it is not correct if someone has the potential to practice the Mahayana path, but you lead them into the Hinayana path. And so you have to know the predispositions of the different sentient beings whom you are going to give your teachings and help. And so long as something remains hidden from you, you are not, you don't have a clear idea about it, then you cannot teach others about it. And therefore, in order to serve others fully without attaining omniscience, there's no way you can do that. And then with regards to the aspiration to help others, so first of all, in order to have compassion or affection towards others, you have to feel them dear to your heart, to yourself. So usually we think how we go about in our life is that we wish goodness for someone who helps us, and whereas we wish someone who doesn't help us, who really harms us, to have suffering and other misfortunes. So first of all, you have to develop this attitude of seeing all sentient beings as attractive and pleasant to you. And therefore, you have to, in the cultivation of Bodhichitta, there is one way, which is the sevenfold cause and effect instruction. And then there is a second way, which is that of equalizing and developing this attitude of equalizing and exchanging self with others. So you have to know that if you hold others more dear than yourself, there is a great benefit, whereas if you hold yourself more dear than others, then there is great disadvantage. And therefore you hold others to be dear to yourself. and then to have the aspiration or the wish for other sentient beings to be out of suffering. First of all, you have to know what suffering is. Suffering here doesn't only mean the painful, obvious, painful experiences that we go through, because this is even so the experiences that we usually consider as painful experience are called suffering of suffering. And then there is a second type of suffering which we consider usually as pleasant and pleasurable experiences, such as having good food, shelter, clothing, and then also name and honor and so forth. So if you rely on them more and more, what happens is they turn into suffering. For example, if you buy a new car, in the beginning you'll find it really attractive. You'll be very, and then after 2 or 3 months, when you see another brand new car, you find your car to be rather old, and you are attracted to the new one. And so this first car that you bought 2 or 3 months ago seems like an annoyance to you sometimes. So in the beginning, there is some kind of satisfaction that you draw from the new car. But as time goes by, what happens is, after a while, that same car makes you rather uncomfortable, unhappy about it. And then similarly, it happens with our near and dear ones, friends. In the beginning, we become very friendly with them, but then after a while, we develop dislike towards them as well. And then when people, celebrities also may enjoy becoming famous through media and all that, but then when the media people chase after them too much, then it gives them displeasure, makes them unpleasant. And so similarly with your wealth, what happens is that you get more and more people deceiving you, coming after your wealth. Whereas if you don't have much wealth, then you will not have these false friends. So with wealth, a lot of preconceptions and develop. So these are considered to be what we consider usually to be attractive or pleasant, or said to be experiences of suffering, changeable suffering. And all these different kinds of unwanted experiences happen to us because of some the ignorance. So what is under the influence of ignorance is known as the third type of suffering, which is the pervasive conditioned existential suffering. So we have to know these three different types of ignorant sufferings that we experience. And then when you see others suffering, then there's reason for us to feel compassion towards them. So rather than that, what happens to us is when we see somebody wealthy and all that, then we develop jealousy. So we don't. That is because we don't see that situation as being in the nature of suffering. If this world were to be full of happiness, then we don't need to pursue liberation, nirvana. You can say, I'm happy here in this world, in this samsara. And then You don't need to check into what the ignorance is, how ignorance comes about, and what it brings about. And therefore, in order to see the shortcomings of samsara, the cycle of existence, you, you have to know that sentient beings who are in samsara are bound by these three types of sufferings, and therefore you will have the wish to lead them onto the liberation, and you want to be able to bear the suffering that they are undergoing. So in order to know that others are suffering, first of all, you have to acknowledge your own suffering. You have to be able to recognize the suffering that you are undergoing. And therefore, in order to develop compassion towards others, you have to develop a renunciation to this samsara. So once you have this renunciation to samsara and acknowledging the suffering in it, then you would be able to develop the compassion towards others and to think of leading them out of suffering and leading them to liberation. But in the beginning, it would seem rather impossible, or rather very extremely difficult to develop these experiences of renunciation and compassion. But then, if you train your mind gradually, you'll be able to develop them. So the way to go about it in terms of renunciation is that in order to be able to develop, understand that the third type of suffering is suffering, you have to see that the changeable sufferings are in the nature of suffering, and for that you even have to develop that suffering is in fact suffering. And in order to be able to do that, you have to lose attraction towards the pleasures of this life, next life, and then by developing that, you also develop the attitude or the wish to overcome this. You think of attaining the higher rebirths in the next rebirth. And you don't get attached to this life and the next life, but so you have to develop the attitude of attaining the wish to attain higher rebirth, and then in this life you have to first develop that of the understanding of impermanence. So this is the practice pertaining to beings of small scope. So we are on verse which is numbered 4. So suppose we have a lifespan of 100 years. So whatever we do to gain, to make living, is only for this life, usually. So whatever we do for this life only, we have to leave behind at the time of death. So since the time of our conception in the mother's womb, and after birth, whatever we do, if they're for this life alone, they do not have any. They do not help us in the next life, and we have to leave them behind when we die. Verse number 5. In order to have a meaningful life, we can have influence from our good friends. For example, if we have friends who are really interested in pursuing their studies, and who do not want to misbehave, be immoral, then you would also be influenced by that friend, and you would also do the same. But if you have a bad friend who is taking to alcohol and drinking and tobacco and so forth, then that friend would also influence you as well. So unless you have your own keep your own integrity, you can be influenced by the non-virtuous friends, evil friends. And what you have to, what this verse shows is that you have to be friend with those who are favorable to your own spiritual growth. And similarly, you have to those who disturb you, hinder you from doing study, reflection, and meditation on that of those practices which lead you to happiness in this life and the lasting happiness in the future. Those kind of bad friends should be avoided. And next verse. Favorable friends, especially your spiritual masters, you have to rely when you rely on them, your negativities will reduce and diminish, and then your positive qualities will grow like a waxing moon. So such a spiritual friend, a spiritual teacher should be relied upon. So a teacher or a virtuous friend is so how a student grows is dependent on the teacher, teacher's advice and so forth, and therefore the teacher. So here we are talking about a teacher in connection with the teaching of the Buddha. So a teacher here doesn't only mean someone who gives you knowledge, who imparts knowledge to you, but gives knowledge and advice for your internal transformation. And a teacher has to be such that, as Dromdenpa has said, a teacher must be able to give a teaching, which is very vast teaching, which shows scholarship. So when he explains to his students whatever practice points the teacher is explaining, he has to be able to draw from all other practices and give a very broad view of the teaching. And then at the end of the teaching, all of the teaching must boil down to what is most beneficial to the students. Gendun Drup, the first Dalai Lama, the omniscient first Dalai Lama, has said, those who do not apply the teaching to overcome the enemy within, the destructive emotions, but try to use the teachings just for argumentation, they are using the Dharma like people who, although need to overcome some spirit on the east, they perform the ritual to the west. So it's not enough that when you know the Dharma, to have the ability to contradict others about their views and their understandings. So things do appear as if exist from its own side, but that's not the way things are. So we have a very the way of looking at things or perceiving things which is not incompatible with the reality. Therefore, we have to contradict this kind of view after having studied the Dharma and counter such attitudes. And at the end of the giving the teaching, the teacher has to make the teaching very beneficial to the students. So this is, of course, there are many different interpretations of these words by Dromtempa, but I think this is what I have explained is a good one. So with regard to the Dharma, you have to preserve the Dharma and promote it through study, reflection, and meditation. And so, being a scholar, you uphold the Dharma, the teachings, and then through your experience, you uphold that of the realization of Dharma. So, with regard to the spiritual friends, the Dharma teachers, or spiritual friends, there are many different characteristic features or defining features of a spiritual master according to the Vinaya up to their Tantrayana. Around 20 years ago, I met some Chinese who told me that there were some Tibetans coming to mainland China giving teachings, and then in the beginning they appeared to be teachers, but then as time went by, eventually what they found was that these Dharma teachers, who called themselves Dharma Rajas, king of Dharmas, were in China just seeking women and money. So they asked me what I could do to tell them. So I told them that there's nothing I can do individually from here, but then you have to check that person who comes to you saying that they are teachers. And there are many different qualifications of a teacher that are set in different texts. And you have to spy on them and then find out who the person really is. And when the person really shows all the qualities of a teacher, then you should rely on him and as a spiritual teacher. And Satya Pandita also has said that we consider the worldly things as very important in our life, which is only for this life, whereas the Dharma is considered to be very unimportant. People don't even value it as like a bone that is given to the food of the dogs. So Satya Pandita is saying that a lasting happiness is dependent on the Dharma. So we are talking about doing the practice of Dharma from lifetime to lifetime for over many lifetimes, and then finally reaching that of Buddhahood. And so such a Dharma should not be devalued. We cannot just run after the Dharma when we hear somebody is there to teach the Dharma as if the dog meets a piece of meat, but we have to, and we can't just go and bow to them saying Amitabha and all that. So it's important for us to check the qualifications of the teacher, such as said by Maitreya in his Sutra Alamkara. There are 10 qualifications that are given of a Dharma teacher. So in essence, you should have a qualification of scholarship, and then also on top of them that of an experienced person. So with regard to scholarship, the person must be learned in the three scriptures, the three collections of scriptures, and be at least have some good understanding of them to help themselves. And then with regard to the being experienced, they should have the practice of integrate the practices of the three trainings of morality, concentration, and wisdom. Tsongkhapa has said that someone who has not been able to subdue themselves cannot subdue others. So, and in terms of subduing others, it is not enough to just call themselves to have some kind of experience of small bits of experiences here and there. But one should know the means to subdue others in accordance with the overall teaching of the Dharma of the Buddha. And so the means to subdue others is through the training of morality, concentration, and wisdom. So this is said in Lama Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stages of the path, when he comments on the verse from Sutra Alamkara. So today we have false lamas, so we have to be careful. So at that time when these Chinese from the mainland China told me about such teachers, then I told them that she has to know these qualifications of a Lama. And then if you have some doubt about the person, then you have to ask the person and clarify about whatever you doubt about that person in terms of his behavior. And then next comes that of the practice or the methods of attaining happiness or well-being in the next lives. And then the suffering of the lower realms is taught later. So in relation to it, in connection with the teachings on the karma and taking refuge in the three jewels taught. So verse number 7. Those who we take refuge should be the ones who can actually save us. So as we have a saying in the world, that someone who has already who has fallen on the ground cannot pick up another person who has fallen on the ground. So someone who is supposed to be refuge for others who are fallen in three types of sufferings should be free from out of these sufferings. So themselves captive in the prison of samsara, such as the worldly gods like Brahma and those of the wrathful deities, worldly deities, Ishvara and so forth. So these cannot save you from the samsara. I usually jokingly tell Tibetans that in our monasteries, usually the statue of the Buddha is, of course, in the temples. And of course, we do revere the Buddha, and it's just it stops just there. Our reverence stopped to the Buddhas, just whereas in another room, which is called Gonkang, Protector House, we have wrathful deities, in which, of course, there may be trans-worldly deities, Buddhas, but then there are also other deities which are worldly ones, which look very fierce, full, and we almost take refuge in them, which is wrong, I tell them, because of we are Buddhists. As Buddhists, we cannot take refuge in the worldly deities. And so the protected deities that come in the mandalas of the Tantra, of course, are all beyond the world, transworldly. So these are exceptions. Otherwise, others which are, as I told you, the story about the Japanese losing his sleep after having visited a monastery in Tibet. We should not have a very high regard to the worldly deities which bear their fangs in our. And Kalu Rinpoche has told me a story. He visited a monastery, and there was a monk who guided people in the temple, and then after having led the Kalu Rinpoche through the temple, the main temple, then this person, Kalu Rinpoche, came to the Gonkang, or the protector house of Shugden, in fact. And then when he reached there, the guide actually prostrated 3 times in front of the temple of Shugden, and then was even had the expression of feeling fearful when he came to this Gonkang. So I would not mention the name, but of this guide. So when we see the Buddhas, we don't really fear that. Whereas when we are near the protector rooms, these wrathful-looking protector, then we feel we feel frightened. So Buddha Dharma is not about, we should not practice Buddha Dharma out of fear. So Buddha has said that we have suffering, and has taught the suffering, that there is suffering and then there is the cause or the origin of suffering. And having taught that, he has not just left his teaching at there, but then he said that there is a way out of this suffering and the causes of suffering, and therefore he taught the next 2 noble truths: noble truth of suffering, cessation, and the path leading out of. So those who have come from Singapore, you know about Dorje Shugden. So Dorje Shugden originated during the time of the 5th Dalai Lama. So his identification of Shugden is that Shugden arose from wrong prayers and was there to harm the Dharma and the sentient beings. So in terms of the cause of Shugden, he was a result of wrong prayers. And then in terms of his function, or what he does, he is there to harm the Dharma and sentient beings. So it was not a written story, some sort of a story that the first Dalai Lama wrote, but it actually, from his own experience, he wrote this. So we can take his words to be authentic. And then after the fifth Dalai Lama, the seventh Dalai Lama's teachers also have said that Shugden was not a Dharma protector as such, but he arose from the wrong prayers. And of course, in the Sakya school, there was a time when Sakya teachers also propitiated this Shugden. They didn't do it relying on him as a refuge, but he was just considered as a worldly spirit. And later on, what happened was within the Geluk system, people started raising the status of Doji Shugden, and even to the point that they said that he was the protector of the teaching of Tsongkhapa, the Geluk tradition. So how that happened was during the 13th Dalai Lama's time. Of course, he was very he objected to the practice of Shugden very much. But after his passing, after his death, then people started raising the status of Shugden. So of course, I also did propitiate Shugden in the beginning, but then I left it afterwards. So amongst the Singapore people who have come here, if there are anybody who propitiates Shugden, you should not do it. So you should not fear Shugden harming you or anything like that, but you can rely on Lama Tsongkhapa's texts, such as the commentary to Madhyamaka Avatara, and then the commentary to Mula Madhyamaka Karika, and then there of the essence of true eloquence, and then there of this great insight chapter of great treatise to this insight chapter of both the great treatise and the middle, intermediate or the medium length treatise on the stages of the path. And then regarding Tantra, he has written the Ngagrim Chemo, the great treatise on the path of Tantra to the stages of the path of Tantra to enlightenment. And so these are like Lama Tsongkhapa can be considered as your guru or your meditational deity and your protector. So after having taken refuge in the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, what the actual refuge is that of cessation, the true cessation and true path. Now, in order to be able to experience them, you have to start from now to avoid doing negative actions and cultivating the positive ones. So this must be done from now on. So in brief, how you practice the Dharma is first avoid doing the negative actions, non-virtuous actions, as I said earlier, the non-meritorious actions. And then, because these come from the destructive emotions, the second is that of overcoming the destructive emotions. And then the third level is that of overcoming the imprints left by these destructive emotions. And so the whole of the teaching of the Buddha is about overcoming our defilements, the destructive emotions, destructive emotions are such that no sooner they arise in us, we become disturbed, we lose peace of mind, equilibrium of mind. And so, when in the practice of Dharma, the people outside whom we usually consider as enemies are not real enemies, but the real enemy is inside us. Those who provoke anger in us are even taught as said to be looked upon. We are taught to look upon them as our teachers because they give us the opportunity to practice patience and tolerance. So we have to make it the primary point in our practice to overcome these destructive emotions within us. The verse number 8. So the sufferings of the lower realms of existence, such as animal realm, breath realm, and the hell realm, are the fruits of our negative actions. So because of these negative actions, what happens is we experience suffering. So at the causal level, when we do something which causes harm to others, what happens is, as a result of that, we suffer. On the other hand, if we create some cause which bring about happiness in others, the result of that will be happiness for us. And the actions which are neutral give rise to neutral effects. So the suffering of the lower realms of existence, so difficult to bear, is what the Buddha taught to be the fruit of negative actions. Therefore, even at the cost of your life, never to commit the negative actions is the practice of a Bodhisattva. So with regard to this karma, we have dealt with it a little bit earlier. So when we talk about the karma, we can talk in terms of positive and negative actions from their effects, in relation to their effects, and then in terms of the means by which we create the actions, we have the body, speech, and mind. And then there are many other karmas like the propelling karma and completing karma, karma which are certain to give rise to effects, and uncertain, and then karmas which give rise to the effects in this life, in the next immediate next life, and the lives after that. And so regarding these, the detailed explanations are given in Abhidharma Samuchaya and Abhidharma Kosha. So what this shows is how to train ourselves for higher rebirth in the next life, and how to avoid attraction towards the pleasures of this life. So even in the case of the theistic religions, which teach talk about only one life, of course they teach the practice of morality, ethics, to be kind to others, loving, and so forth. So when you practice all these things, you are actually creating the causes for a good rebirth in the next life, whether it is taught in the teachings or not. So whether in Asia or Africa or Latin America, Australia, New Zealand, in any country, wherever the people who are most dedicated to education, modern education in all these different countries, are mostly Christians. And then there are those who dedicate themselves for the poor and needy ones, being selfless. They go to the poorest places in the different countries and set up schools and the healthcare centers and so forth. So most of them are Christians. There are very few Buddhist monks who do these things, to be frank. I was in Thailand one time, and the leader of the Buddhist Sangha, there was a very good person, and I have talked with him, and I said that the Christian practitioners, brothers and sisters, doing so much for the welfare of others in society, but then we need to do something about it. And he told me that, of course, as Buddhist monks, we have to stay in our monasteries and you should not go into the cities and towns. And so the Christian brothers and sisters do so much for the welfare of others in society in terms of health and education, although they do not talk about the next life, but then they are creating the good karmas for a good life in the next rebirth. And similarly, teachings on being honest, not stealing, and not being greedy, and all these are common to all the major religious traditions. And then when it comes to talk about wrong view, of course, we can also talk about wrong view in relation to the different religious traditions. So all the 10 non-virtuous actions can be explained in connection with the different religious traditions. Whereas now when you do your practice of avoiding the non-virtuous actions on the basis of taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, then your practice becomes Buddhist practice. Happiness in the three realms, like dew on a blade of grass, is subject to instantaneous fading away. To strive for the supreme state of liberation that never wavers is the practice of a Bodhisattva. Now here we come to the point in the context of Lamrim. This practice is a practice of the beings with the intermediate scope. So having trained oneself in the practices of the beings with small scope, you enter into this stage of the intermediate scope. So the term here, which says instantaneous fading away, refers to just the things disintegrating momentarily. So when you look at the subatomic levels, you can see there's some momentary change going on very fast. Now we have to think about this momentary change. For example, in the case of these mountains that we see, the mountains are there, they have been there for thousands of years. The changes happen in the mountains very slowly, gradually, and after some generations, then we can see big changes have happened. So the shapes and the size, colors and so forth of the mountains can be seen, an obvious change can be seen over time, like Himalayas, which are said to be very young mountain ranges. So the obvious change that we see over a period of certain generations of human beings cannot happen only in these changes have happened because of change happening year by year, and the changes in a year happen month by month, and changes in a month happen week by week, and then those changes happen hour by hour and minute by minute and second by second. So that's, and in the case of human beings, we were not born bald. I was not born bald, but then and then also when you grow gray hair, the gray hair was not there when you were born, but then this happens due to change. If a child were born rather bald or with gray hair, then that would be considered as a bad omen. And so these changes that we see with our eyes happen because of this momentary, subtle momentary changes that are happening in the things. And then the changes which we see with our eyes, the obvious changes are said to be the gross level of change or impermanence. So the gross changes or impermanence happens because when the things come across some counteracting factor, they cease to exist anymore. And whereas the subtle change, momentary change, happens because of nature. The moment something comes about as a result of its causes and conditions, it is in the nature of change and disintegration. So this change, momentary change, is brought about by its causes. So because of that, these momentary changes are there under the influence of their causes. And so with regard to this impure body, for example, of that we have, it changes momentarily, and because of that, it has come from its causes. And what the cause is that of ignorance. So because this body that we have is a result of our ignorance, it's not something good, is it? So it's so when you think about it, you find it that it's quite intriguing, doesn't it? And therefore, from impermanence, based on impermanence, the Buddha taught suffering, and from suffering, based on suffering, he taught that of selflessness. So there are different interpretations of it. The destructive emotions which are in the nature of change and impermanence, and which has given rise to our contaminated aggregates, are not something which we should think of, we should feel possessive about. So if these aggregates, the contaminated aggregates, were due to our ignorance, and if there's nothing we can do about it, then of course we don't have to think further. But then, because it is under the influence of our ignorance, there is that of the grasping at a self, which is like single, autonomous, permanent, or because of such wrong views, we have ignorance. So this happiness in the three realms is subject to instantaneous fading away, shows the subtle momentary change or impermanence. And because the cause of this suffering is ignorance, therefore we are in the nature of suffering. So once you are out of free from this destructive emotions, the bondage of the destructive emotions, so although this life may be under the influence of ignorance, but then there may be occasions where some beings can take rebirth out of compassion. And therefore to strive for the supreme state of liberation that never wavers is the practice of a bodhisattva. So with regard to the liberation, in Pramana Vartika, when Dharmakirti goes through the argument or proof of liberation, he says that this contaminated, the contaminated aggregates cannot last forever because the cause of it is ignorance, and because this ignorance has a very powerful antidote against it, which can put an end to it. Therefore, by putting an end to this ignorance, you can reach liberation. So this shows the path of the beings of intermediate scope. So since ignorance is the root of samsara, going in the rounds of samsara, then the wisdom realizing, which realizes selflessness directly, goes against that ignorance, cuts that root. Now, in order to develop that kind of deeper penetrative insight, you have to have very powerful single-pointed concentration, and for that, in turn, you have to have a very powerful practice of morality. And so, based on the understanding of selflessness, when you have these practices of morality, concentration, and wisdom, they are called the higher morality, wisdom, and concentration. So, because the mere practice of morality, concentration, and concentration are there in the non-Buddhist traditions as well. The Hindus have these practices. And also the wisdom is there within the other religious traditions as well. And because in the context of Buddhist practice, we have to have the understanding of emptiness or selflessness. These practices of morality, concentration, and wisdom are termed as higher, qualified by this term higher. And then after that comes the practice or cultivation of bodhicitta. First of all, you have to train yourselves in the means for attaining higher rebirth, and then you have to train yourself in the means of the liberation, the path to liberation. And having developed that, then when you think about the sufferings of other sentient beings, suffering in the sense of the deeper suffering, the third type of suffering, the existential suffering, then you wish that they be out of this kind of suffering, because this suffering is rooted in ignorance. Therefore, in order to be able to help others out of suffering, you have to know that you have to first of all become enlightened yourself and see the fact, the possibility, this possibility of enlightenment for yourself, because the ignorance, which is the root of all samsara, can be put an end to through the wisdom realizing selflessness. And from the beginningless time, your mothers have cherished you. If they now suffer, what good is your own happiness? So by practicing the three, cultivating the three trainings, and if you reach enlightenment yourself, of course you are just one single individual, but the rest of the sentient beings still remain. Suppose you were amongst a group of people who were starving to death, but then you have some food to eat, and if you take this food while sitting amongst others who are starving to death, it would be really immoral, isn't it? So it would be better to share the food that you have with these people who are around you, who are starving to death. So similarly, while other sentient beings, the mother sentient beings, are still suffering in samsara, and if you think only to liberate yourself alone, that would not be correct. And therefore you have to work for the sentient beings. Of course, if the sentient beings are not related to you in any way, then perhaps you can work for your own liberation. But then, that's not the case. We can see that directly or indirectly, all of us are connected. So, for example, here we are having tea. So this tea didn't just appear here spontaneously. But somebody has made it. First you have to have the tea leaves, then it has to come from some field, and to make the tea you have to use stove, you have to have fire. For that you have to have gas, which must come from some industry, and then the water that we use for making the tea also come from so many other people. And our clothes also, like the silk comes from the worm. We have to kill the worm in order to have the silk threads. So our clothing, our food, our shelter, and all the facilities and our fame all come from independence on other sentient beings. And therefore, you can also think about other sentient beings being having been one's mother and as well. Let's have tea. Tomorrow morning we'll have Avalokiteshvara initiation. So I hope we'll be able to finish this text today. Therefore, in order to liberate in limitless numbers of sentient beings, cultivating bodhicitta is the practice of a bodhisattva. So therefore, whoever we are, if we wish to be very happy, we wish to remain without any regret, then do something good for others. So if you do that, then you'll have some kind of a confidence, the courage. Whereas if you only think about yourself, if you remain self-centered, then there's nothing really like that. Even while remaining in samsara, the good things that happen in our life in samsara are dependent on other sentient beings. And then the cultivation of and progression on the path to liberation also comes in dependence on other sentient beings. So, for example, with regards to higher rebirth, which comes as a result of practicing the 10 virtuous actions, or by abstaining from the 10 non-virtuous actions. So even in terms of this, the morality of keeping from the 10 non-virtuous actions, you can practice them in relation to others, not harming others, not and doing things which help others. Then you will have goodness, happiness. You will have long life. You'll have power, authority, and all this. So all the things that good things that happen to us in our life are dependent on others, even in this life and in the next lives. For the higher rebirth, and also happens in connection with other sentient beings, dependent on other sentient beings. And this liberation or nirvana that we talk about comes as a result of practicing the three trainings: the higher morality, concentration, and wisdom. So these practices are done in connection with other sentient beings. So you see that there is some disadvantage of doing this and that bad thing, and therefore you avoid doing them. And when you avoid them, you have to take others in consideration and avoid harming others. And therefore, since there is there are others in relation to whom you avoid doing bad things, you are dependent on your practice of virtue is dependent on others. And so the practice of morality, of course, is very obvious that it has to be done in relation to others. Concentration, I don't know, and wisdom. And then the practice of love or loving kindness has to be done in connection with other sentient beings, because you have to feel and so loving kindness and compassion has to grow in us in relation to others, because we have to see the suffering of others, and we have to wish them to have happiness and being out of suffering. And therefore, we have to look at them, sentient beings. Even our enemies have to be looked upon as our teachers. Of course, you can say that you can argue that the enemy helps you perhaps to practice patience. But then the enemy doesn't have the intention to help us. That's why should I work for them, for him or her? So in the practice of patience and in the practice of Dharma, you don't have to worry about whether the other person has the intention to help you or be good to you or not. But because you help yourself to finally gain liberation, you have to help yourself and practice patience with others. And if you were to say that something doesn't help you, or they have the intention to help you, and say that you should not think of others being out of suffering and so forth, then you can also be argued. The argument can be against you would be like. The liberation, nirvana, which you aspire so much to attain, doesn't have any thought or intention to help you at all, but still you want it. And therefore, Guide to the Bodhisattva way of life says that you cannot practice patience in connection with the Buddha, because the Buddhas have no intention to harm anybody and cannot harm anybody, but there's no way you can practice patience in relation to Buddha, but only in relation to someone who provokes anger and who harms you, you can practice patience, and therefore even this animal who harms you and who hurts you in this life should be thought. You should think of helping them because of helping you to practice patience. And so, as it said in the 7-point mind training, think or feel grateful to others or all others, and take all blame upon oneself. So all the goodness that happened to us in this life, and all the realizations that we develop, and all the ultimate goal of enlightenment, all these happen in dependence on other sentient beings. So unless you can hold others more dear than yourself, and you cannot reach enlightenment. So instead, if you hold others more dear than yourself and forsake your own well-being and happiness, then the result and the end result would be that you will reach enlightenment. And so while dedicating totally for the well-being of others, and to think of, while you think of becoming a Buddha, your own interest is all fulfilled as byproduct. The next, number 11, shows that of equalizing and exchanging self for others. So equalizing self for others doesn't mean that you change yourself with others, exchange yourself with others. What it's saying is, usually we'd rather remain indifferent to others, but this has to be changed. Whereas you also disregard the other's well-being, here you are taught to disregard your own well-being and hold others more dear than yourself. Everyone, yourself and others are equal in that you don't want suffering, but you want happiness. So just as you can attain that of liberation and overcome all suffering, the others also can do that. The difference between you and others is that you are only a single individual, only one person, whereas others are numberless. And secondly, the more you think about others' well-being, you profit. The more you remain self-centered, the more you suffer. So I say that all of us have selfish attitude, are selfish. If you wish to be selfish, you have to be wise. Be selfish wisely. You should not be selfish foolishly. So why that is so is all the happiness, the well-beings, and the profits that you draw, temporary and the ultimate, come from this. And even the unfavorable conditions turn into blessings. So they also, this kind of attitude turned even the unfavorable conditions into favorable conditions. Whereas some actions of your speech and body may be negative when you do it with selfish motive. When you do them, when you're able to do these, engage in even these kind of actions, negative actions, it could be positive. So if you only think of becoming enlightened for yourself alone, then when you reach that goal of nirvana, then the result is all attained, and that's the end of that motivation. end result of that motivation. Whereas, so it stops there. Whereas if you do something good with the motivation of Buddhahood, to attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings, then the result is limitless. Even after becoming a Buddha, it keeps on, continues. And if you do some good just for some goodness in this life, once you attain that result, that is all. And similarly, this is similar to. Similarly, it is the case with the good things that you do to attain high rebirth, like that of a god in the golden ram and so forth. The result, once you are born there, the result ends there. So if you do something good, a positive action, with a selfish motive, then it is very weak. The result will be very small, whereas if you do it with the altruistic motivation, then the result is really huge. So in short, Bodhisattva Charyavatara says that all sufferings in samsara come from self-centeredness, and all happiness in the world comes from wishing others to be happy. And then Shantideva goes on to say that there's what need is there to say more. Look at the difference between the Buddhas and this, other sentient beings. The Buddhas having dedicated themselves for the well-being of others, and the others who are still remained in samsara out of selfish motive. So in general, training the mind in cultivating that of bodhicitta, and particularly the training the mind in the equalizing and exchanging self for others. As it is said in the 7-point mind training, all the unfavorable conditions of this degenerate age may be transformed into the path of path of enlightenment. So the 5 degenerations are those of the degeneration of lifespan and afflictions and so forth. As long as he doesn't remember them all. Even if someone driven by excessive desire steals all your wealth or incites someone else to steal it, to dedicate to this person your body's possession and all your virtue of the 3 times is the practice of a bodhisattva. So without feeling any sense of anger or anything like that towards someone who does all these bad things to you, is the practice of bodhisattva. So Geshe Tongme Sangpo, the author of this text, was one time went to a place to give teachings, and after having given the teaching, he received lots of offerings from the people, and he was returning from the place to his home, and on his way to home, he met some bandits, and then the bandits must have known that he made so much wealth. And Tongme Sangpo said that gave everything that he has, and then told the bandits that you can take everything that I have. And then the bandits were leaving to the opposite direction where Tongme Sangpo had come from, towards the village. And then after a while, Tongme Sangpo turned back and talked to them that they should not go that direction, because the people might know that you robbed me, and therefore they might beat you up. And so there's danger that you may be beaten up by the villagers. And Gisa Tongme Sangpo told the bandits that they should take another route to avoid being beaten up by the villagers. Uh, and then Tongme Sangpo was one time sitting in a place and where he was because he was a great meditator of Bodhichitta, practitioner of Bodhichitta. So in one place where he was meditating came a sheep, a lamb, and a wolf. And so both of these animals was sat beside him very comfortably without harming each other, and even were playing with each other. And then there's also a story that he was at one time in a place where there was some battle going on, and then people were running away from the place. And he said he didn't have anybody to fear because he has not harmed anybody. And I met one monk, an abbot of Tabo Monastery, and in his room. He had a cabinet, and his cabinet was not locked. And I told him, your cabinet was not locked, so don't you have anything to lose? And he said, nothing. And then I met him recently in Jispa and asked him if if his cabinet needed any locks now, and he said, no, not at all. So this is very good. So whatever he made, money, he was dedicated to the monastery, and then he also built a school in Tabo. So all the villagers around the all the villagers around the monastery were very friendly with him. They all call him Khen Rinpoche, the precious abbot. And so if the abbot had been keeping a huge gold, a piece of gold, a bricks of gold without sharing with others, then this would not have happened. So there's no danger that this abbot would die of starvation at all, because being all the villagers being friendly with him. If someone cuts off your head, even when you have not done the slightest wrong, through the power of compassion to take this misdeed upon yourself is the practice of a Bodhisattva. So even if you have not wronged someone, but the person wrongs you, it is saying that this verse is saying that you should not feel angry with that person, but in fact think of taking upon yourself the result or the effect of this misdeed. Should someone slander you in a billion words, with a loving heart, to proclaim his qualities, good qualities in return, is the practice of a bodhisattva. In the middle of the crowds of people, someone reveals your hidden faults and abuses you for them. To see him as a spiritual friend and bow with respect is the practice of a bodhisattva. So if you were in a crowd and then someone digs your faults, you should not feel unhappy and angry, but be respectful to the person. Perhaps it was Geshe Langri Thangpa, one of the Gaddam masters, that during his time there was another master, Sharawa, so they were known as the duo masters of Gaddam, the Langshar duo. So one time there was a person who asked a woman who has given birth to a child, and this person sent the woman to Geshe-la Thangpa to tell him that this was his child, and so the women went there and said that went to Langri Thangpa and said, "This is your child, please take him." And Langri Thangpa just took him. And then next time, the woman came back to Geshe-la Thangpa and said, "I was mistaken. Please give me back my child." And Geshe-la Thangpa said nothing, but gave back her child. So he was respectful in both times. If someone who you cherish as dearly as your own child takes you for an enemy, then like a mother whose child is sick, to love that person even more is the practice of Bodhisattva. So if a mother had an only child, that she would be really love that person, that child, and so even the child may go mad and beat the mother won't feel unhappy with the child. Its behavior. So likewise, this verse is teaching us to act like that. And the next verse. Even if someone will wrong you unreasonably, then you have to consider that person as a guru. So practicing Dharma in general and in particular cultivating Bodhichitta, there is always a danger that when you are too poor, there is too poor or too rich, then there is danger of losing the courage to practice Bodhichitta, to cultivate Bodhichitta. So here it says, and so poverty or being acute illness and possessive of evil spirits, these could be conditions to weaken your practice of bodhicitta. So take upon yourself the negativities and sufferings of every being and never to get discouraged is the practice of a bodhisattva. And so having gained some understanding that there is a possibility of putting an end to the ignorance and thereby attain that of nirvana, liberation. And then if you could combine it with the attitude of equalizing and exchanging oneself with others, then you can think of reaching that of ultimate enlightenment of Buddhahood. So if you could dedicate whatever happens to you for the well-being of others, nothing could stop you from your practice of bodhicitta. And in fact, all the even the unfavorable conditions will be seen as blessings for your spiritual growth. Though famous and prominent, someone to whom others bow. So Dromtempa has said that even if some people may revere you, place you highly, but you have to, in your heart of heart, you have to hold yourself lowly. So this verse number 19 is teaching that kind of attitude, without having any kind of arrogance. verse number 20. So on this you are able to conquer the enemies within, which are those of the attachment and anger. There's no way you can conquer the enemies outside. However, however much you may try to overcome the external enemies by using force and might and all that, there's no way you can put an end to them forever. Therefore, the best way is to conquer the enemy within. So being obsessed with the eight worldly concerns of not being happy when you are scorned by others, or being happy when you are praised, and being happy when you are happy, when you gain offerings, and unhappy when you don't gain them, and so forth. These eight worldly concerns should be avoided. And so sensual pleasures and so forth. Up to this point, the practice of conventional bodhicitta is shown, and then the verse number 22 downwards shows the practice of or cultivation of ultimate bodhicitta. All appearances are in your own mind, and mind itself primordially transcends all mental fabrications. Knowing this, and to remain free from apprehending the signs of subject and object, is the practice of Bodhisattva. So within the Mahayana Madhyamaka philosophical schools, there are those who assert or that conventional existence of some self-characterized phenomena, and then there are those who reject such a way of existence, even conventionally. So the first type of Madhyamaka philosophers include Bhava Viveka, Jnana Garbha, and Chandarakshita, Kamalashila. So these masters accept some self-characterized phenomena conventionally. With regard to Master Jnana Garbha and Bhava Viveka, they accepted external existence of external phenomena, whereas Kamalashila and Chandarakshita rejected externality of things, external existence of external phenomena. So these masters were termed as the Savatantrika Madhyamaka philosophers. So the upper and lower Savatantrika Madhyamaka philosophers, within them the Bhava Viveka and Jnana Garbha comes into the category of upper Savatantrika Madhyamaka philosopher, and then the lower ones include Chandarakshita and Kamalashila, who accept their philosophy in accordance with the Chittamatra philosophy as well. So some Tibetan scholars have commented on the Madhyamaka philosophy in accordance with the Chittamatra or Yogacara Savatantrika Madhyamaka philosophy. So this text seems to be doing that. And even in the 7-point mind training, where it talks about the leave everything in the nature of the alaya, seems to be referring to the Citta philosophy. So there are many different interpretations. So regarding this 22nd verse, all appearances are your own mind, means there is some kind of appearance that things have some externality, but they appear like that because of some imprint which were left from the past on our mind, which manifest. And so the object that you see and the mind which sees it, the subject and the object, they come from the same seed, which was left on the imprint on the mind stream, and therefore the things are devoid of this duality of subject and object. So therefore all the appearances are merely the mind, your own mind, which manifests in these different multiplicity of things. And then the mind itself primarily transcends all fabrications. Can be understood from the point from the point of view of Madhyamaka, because Chittamatrin or mind-only school accepts that although there's no externality to things, still the mind has some independent existence, whereas Madhyamakas don't accept the independent existence of mind. So here it can be, this second line can be understood in terms of the mind which is totally absorbed in emptiness, and from its perspective there is no duality of subject and object. So this shows the maintaining that of the ultimate bodhicitta in meditation. And then the next line, knowing this and to remain free from apprehending the signs of subject and object, refers to the cultivation or the practice of experience of this ultimate bodhicitta during the post-meditation session. And when you encounter objects that pleases your mind, like rainbows in the summer season, though they seem beautiful, not to view them as real and to give up attachment to them is the practice of a bodhisattva. So you have to see things as if they are like illusion. What happens to us because of our attachment or grasping at some kind of true existence in things, because although they are like illusion, we don't see them like that, and therefore we have all kinds of unwanted experiences. And then comes the 6 perfections. And on top of the 6 perfections, if you add 4 more, they make up 10 perfections. So the perfection of wisdom is refers to that the practice or cultivation of wisdom, and And then the other five perfections get their name because of this, as the perfection of wisdom. So, with regard to the practice of the six perfections of bodhisattvas, you have to study the ornament of Mahayana Sutra, Sutra Alamkara, Mahayana Sutra Alamkara. So when it comes to giving, the practice of giving, without having any regard for some kind of a return that you may get from by giving someone some gift, you have to give totally without any selfish motive. And there's also the generosity of love. So giving material, giving fearlessness, giving. And with regard to bodhisattva practice of morality, it's not only abstaining from non-virtuous actions, misdeeds, but be dedicating whatever one has, one's body, speech, and mind, everything, and all the virtues for the other sentient beings, without having any. Here, you do this with the attitude of abstaining that of selfish motive. And so there's the discipline, and then there's the abstaining from the immorality, and then cultivating the virtue. So within the bodhisattva discipline or morality, there are three of them. The third one is that of morality of serving others, such as educating others and helping poor, sick people, and showing ways to people who have lost their ways, and so forth. So there are these many different practices of morality of bodhisattvas. Verse number 27. So the first one is withstanding the harm, and then the patience of the truth of Dharma, and accepting suffering. So these are taught, the practice of patience are taught very in great detail in Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life. Verse number 28. Shows that the practice of joyous effort. So here, what it shows is that of the unfavorable condition for the hindrance for keeping up with joyous effort is that of feeling tired and feeling rather discouraged. And so in order to do away with this, you have to feel delighted in engaging or pursuing the practice of bodhisattvas. So, and then therefore it is given the name, or pride. So these different types of the practice of joyous effort are also given in detail in the chapter on joyous effort of Shantideva's Bodhicharya Avatara. And verse number 29 teaches that of the calm abiding, the single-pointed concentration. So without this, you cannot have a clarity of whatever you are meditating on. As Rinpoche has said, this calm abiding helps you to maintain your concentration focused, and also you can scan on the wide field of knowledge with this. So without this, it is extremely important to cultivate single-pointed concentration of or calm abiding, because we all get stuck with this one. To make any progress on the spiritual path and the higher experiences, we get stuck without this. So whether it's bodhicitta or other higher realizations, we all get stuck without this single-pointed concentration. So of course I don't have the time to sit down for to do this kind of cultivate the shine or calm abiding meditation, but those who have more time should spend more time in cultivating this calm abiding, the single-pointed meditation. So calm abiding is that state of mind which stays on the object single-pointedly. So while staying concentrated, you have to have clarity of the focus. Without losing the focus, you have to be clear about it. And so the hindrance to this is for clarity is, so you need first the mindfulness, which holds your mind onto places your mind onto the focus, and then on top of that you have to use that of the introspection, which checks whether the mind is losing its focus or mindfulness, or there is clarity or not, whether it's dull or distracted. So dullness of mind makes you unclear about your focus, but the mind itself losing clarity is that of the what is known as mental sinking. So these hindrances should be overcome to be able to stay focused single-pointedly on the object, and also to be able to stay with clarity of the mind. So you have to develop this concentration which stays on the focus and which is clear about the focus without distraction or mental sinking single-pointedly. If you're able to do that for about 4 hours or so at a stretch, then you'll be able to develop the pliancies or of mind and body. And so these, of course, have to be developed through the 9 steps of cultivating calm abiding. So you have to use this, what are known as the 6 powers, and then the 4 attentions and so forth, which are taught in distinction between the extreme and the middle. And also it's the Kamala Shila's the Bhavana Krama, the book 1, 2, and 3 are very good in terms of explaining this concentration, development of concentration. So within this, within the samsaric level of concentration, there of the formless state is the highest form of concentration. So the purpose of developing concentration, which is also complemented by that of Bodhichitta, is what is taught here. Verse number 30. So by understanding that the things are empty of any inherent existence, the agent, the action, and the place you do the action on, all 3 are absent of any inherent existence, and then with, being held by that of bodhicitta, and then when you do the perfection of morality and so forth, they become causes for final enlightenment. So you might sometimes feel that you are somebody who great, who thinking that you are doing practice of bodhicitta, doing practice or cultivating the wisdom of selflessness and so forth. But if you don't check your own faults within yourself, then you what we get is those false lamas. So we can leave the faults of others as it is without bothering about them. But if you have a great purpose, of course you should not go about pointing others' faults, but you should check your own faults. Zabedru Rinpoche has said that getting praise makes you arrogant, whereas if someone points your faults, it helps you to realize your fault. And also he says that suffering makes you, suffering reduces your pride and arrogance, whereas when you're happy, you become more arrogant. So usually our attitude is such that we want the best of everything, the fastest and the best thing. But so of course, when there's a great purpose for pointing out the faults of others, then of course you have to do that. For example, to help a monk not to be tainted by any faults or going against his vows, you have to point them out. And so with regard to attachment, in verse 33, when I was once in Argentina, I had a gathering or meeting with some religious people and scientists, and one Chilean physicist was there. He was perhaps one of the teachers of Francisco Varela, and he said in the meeting that he was a scientist himself, but he should not be attached to his own field of study, which is physics. So this is true. So I'm a Buddhist monk, but if I'm attached to Buddhism, then that is wrong. So of course, any religious follower of any religion can follow their own religion, but without attachment. Because if you are attached, then you cannot see your own fault and only see the faults of others. So even as a scientist, he told me this, that he should not be attached to. I found this to be a great instruction for myself. In one of the texts by Master Adisha, when you are alone, check your mind. When you are in a group, check your language, check your mouth. So because you might invite lots of troubles on yourself if you talk too much about others, criticizing others. But then, on the other hand, some people talk very nicely. But then I can feel that they are lying while they are talking very nicely. So there are such people as well. So if you talk unwisely, it could hurt others. So when you are in company with others, check your mouth. When you are alone, check your mind. Of course, there's no danger of causing hurting others when you are alone. But when you are alone, you may have lots of thoughts going on in your mind. Such and such thing happened in the past, and and even while alone, you might become very proud and sometimes angry. So you have to check yourself. That's why it says harsh words disturb the minds of others and disintegrate the bodhisattva conduct. Therefore, to give harsh and unpleasant speech towards others is the practice of a bodhisattva. And then, once you become accustomed to afflictions, they are hard to undermine with antidotes. So if you don't try to curb these negative, destructive emotions right from the beginning, then it gets stronger and stronger, and it gets to the point where you are not able to fight it back. So as it says in the 8 verses of training the mind, in all my activities may I check my own mind stream, and so forth. And therefore, with remedial weapons of mindfulness and introspection, to forcefully eliminate afflictions such as attachment the moment they arise is the practice of a bodhisattva. So always you should check yourself whether you are doing something which is beneficial to others or beneficial, and whether it's something which is not beneficial. So out of the two, oneself and others, you have to take yourself as the primary witness or judge of yourself. So others cannot judge yourself. So you have to be the judge, mainly. And His Holiness just finished verse number 36, and now we are on the 37th. To dedicate the merit thus accumulated through these efforts. That's all. We've finished with the 37 verses of the training Bodhisattva. And next comes by relying on the words of genuine master and so forth. And then, because my intelligence is small and my studies few, I lack linguistic skills to please the scholars. Yet, since they are based on sutras and teachings of the genuine masters, I believe these practices of the bodhisattvas are flawless. Nevertheless, since the vastness of a bodhisattva's conduct is difficult to fathom by someone like me and with an inferior intellect, I pray to the genuine masters to consider me with patience all my flaws, such contradictions, incoherence, and so on. And the last one is the dedication verse. By the virtue of the merit gathered here, His Holiness is also reading the colophon. So this text that His Holiness has this colophon, which says that it was there's a dedication verse written by Lhajun Rinpoche. So this text, His Holiness says he's received this text from Lhajun Rinpoche himself. And the last colophon was written by Lhajun Rinpoche himself.
The initiation of our Lukutishara, and the initiation, at the initiation, the Bodhichitta vow, a part of the initiation, is a Master Sutra perform. So firstly, those people, I think firstly, I think you should know the commitment after receiving Bodhisattva's vow. The commitment, 18, or say the root precepts already. Then 46 minor precepts. You should know that. So I think the Chinese translation there. So the English also I think there. So you should know before receiving that initiation, you should know these things. Then, according to your own ability, those people who feel I can preserve these precepts, then take the full initiation. Then those people, little bit, this moment, little bit sort of doubt, then not necessary to accept it, to take Bodhisattva vow. So instead of taking vow, simply develop determination about Bodhichitta. That's anybody can do. So no problem. Even you see the Christians or Muslims or non-believer, you can make some kind of pledge. The rest of my life will be more compassionate person. I never harm other people. So that's good. It become good citizen of the world, isn't it? So you committed, you will never be troublemaker. But okay, that is okay. So I just is what you see because of that. I just want to tell you, this is some of the sort of people in there. You see, they consider me as a troublemaker. So, but from troublemaker's mouth, you see, telling you should not be troublemaker. Myself exceptional. So tomorrow, initiation about 9 o'clock. 9. I will come here about 7:30. Then some preparation. Then about 9, the initiation. Like that. So, good night. Changshu Samjo Rinpo Je Ma Je Ma Lang Je Yo Je Ge Wa Nyamba Me Ba Yang Kong Ne Kong Do Pya Wa Ra Jo Jabe Ba Yu Je Dra Khyamba Da Kun Do Sambo Ten De Shin De Te Da Kun Ji Je So Da Lo Si Ke Wa Ju Sun She Be Kya Wa Dan Je Yin Ma Wa Ka Na Shong Do Da Ge Ge Zang Di Kun Ja Sambo Che She Re Tu Mo